Okay, so you remember this from what I did last week. So here's our power train control module, or PCM. It's not grounding the injectors. We suspect the computer is faulty. That means we have to ensure that these two fuses, as well as this fuse, are healthy. Look where they go, right? So this one comes down, goes into there. This one comes down, goes into the computer. These two go into the computer. We need to see power on all these. We also need to see all these grounds healthy. Okay? So before we condemn any computer, that's part of what's called used to be called a PCM replacement test. We check that that computer has powers and grounds, everything it needs to operate properly, and we can go from there. Okay? So that would be your next step if it looked like the computer wasn't grounding the injectors and we didn't have anti-theft getting in the middle or any of that kind of stuff into play, right? We have no logical reason why that shouldn't satisfy. Okay? So we covered a lot, right? We covered a lot. We have one more area to look, right? We covered a no crank, we covered a no fuel situation, and now we have a no spark situation, right? We haven't talked about ignition systems yet. We will, but we haven't yet. But that's a factor, right? We may not have it. So let's take this and let's go back. Let's get rid of this one. And let's go down one of these things. There's ignition controls, right? If you haven't noticed, everything is my truck outside. It makes it a little more predictable if I back myself in the corner and I realize I got to do something. So we see we got the PCM involved, and each one of these coils has its own signals, right? We have ground going to each. It looks like it's 4-wire coils, which it is. Right, here's your spark plugs. We have an ignition control signal, and that's coming from the computer, right? We have an ignition positive, and that is all coming from, let's follow this, like this, like this. All the D's are tied together. And it goes up like this into there. So there's our pink. That's our power going to all of our coils. We have our low reference. Let's see where that goes. That's tied together and that goes here. So what's low reference? Ground, right? Ground. When we say low reference, we talk about ground. So B is ground on all of them. D is positive, and C is our grounding of our coil. Right? We can see this is grounded. We have our primary signal, which is our powers, right? Battery power going in. The control is the grounding of that, and that causes the spark to come out. So we had no spark. First thing we're going to do is we are going to see if we got spark. We don't want to test any wires if spark is showing up. We want to go and see what we got. So we take one of these things, we unplug a spark plug, we install the spark plug wire onto this, we put that on the spark plug. We have these also, and the spark shows up, right? If the spark shows up, we have spark present. If it doesn't, we don't, and now we have to do some checking. Right? This is another spark tester we have, and this gets grounded. Spark plug wire goes on there, and the spark has to jump across here. Right? This is an HEI style. It's a high energy one. It takes 50,000 volts. It's more like 25,000 volts for the spark to jump this gap. So that stresses that spark and lets us see it. So we do this first. If it's got spark, it's got spark. We want to check that on multiple cylinders. If it doesn't have spark, now we have to go back to that diagram. Right? What's going on? So we check for power. We have no flashing here. So now we got to go in and we got to see what the vehicle needs for that ignition to come in. So if we go back here, we go back up here. going to go back to this. We're going to go into powertrain management. We're going to go to ignition system. We're going to go to description operation. And we're going to read through these things, right? We're going to find out what parts are involved and which parts are responsible for getting that computer to think about grounding those coils. And that will lead us to whether we have a crank sensor, whether we have a PCM issue, whether we have something different with coils, right? We can also have spark plugs that are flooded with fuel because the spark was not very good. So we need to remove spark plugs and look at them and see if they're wet with fuel and things like that, right? So I figured today that I would see, that's what I was trying to do, right? So I wanted to spend today to give you this kind of like a direction thing. Kept me from going outside and setting stuff up either, but that's okay. I think you got the gist of where we're going with this, right? So we're thinking about diagnostics. We're thinking about the steps we take to do what we want to do. We want to do the least amount of work and find out the most amount of information. That's the goal of everything that we're doing. So the steps that I took you on here, you would apply to any circuit you were working on, right? What do you have? What do you not have? What works? What doesn't work? Where am I going with it? Where am I locating my points at? What kind of voltages should I have on things? Those are the areas that you want to focus on. And next week, we're going to go into bidirectional controls, which comes off of this. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like seeing my face. And we'll see where we go from here.